So hello, I'm Nathan. I work at the Electric Coin Company. The Electric Coin Company is completely focused on Zcash. We started saying we're all in on ZEC, but I realized depending on where you come from on the internet, you might say all in on ZEC. Anyway, so in this talk, I want to talk about scalability at a really high level. And if you crave like technical details, stick around for the next talk by Dara. When I say high level, I want to kind of start from first principles and focus on like why I'm doing what I'm doing and why the company is doing what we're doing. So this is our mission statement. Our mission is to empower everyone with economic freedom and opportunity. So I want to tie what I'm doing to that. And I kind of want to talk a little bit about what this means to me. The first thing I want to pick on is the word economic. That means different things to different people. There's like a science to study it that I don't know a whole lot about. In my mind, I see economic activity as being extremely broad, and I kind of think of it as encompassing everything that humans do for interaction at any large scale. So anything like beyond your friends and family, I consider economic activity. Some people say it's the study of scarcity. I think that's extremely broad. It can and should cover how we spend our attention or how institutions or organizations try to direct our attention. It can cover privacy, which seems like a scarce resource. So extremely broad. And then freedom and opportunity. Let's figure out what these are. So here's some dictionary definitions, and I sort of circled some bits that I think are important to me. So the first one is coercion. We talk about coercion and consent a lot in the company and also in the broader community. And I think it's really important to always keep these in mind when working on technology and usability and security. I think they're fundamental, and when technologists don't talk about them, it kind of creeps me out. The next thing I highlighted here in freedom is choice. So that's really important for me. What's important for me is for users to have a choice, to have a responsibility to make their choice for them based on their own like research and their own decision making. That's important for me to like bolster that or reinforce that. And then opportunity can be favorable circumstances or a good chance for progress, right? We can't really control people's circumstances, but I think we can affect their chances by giving them good choices. So I see working on Zcash as the way I can make something that gives as many people as possible a choice of something to use for whatever purposes they decide to use it for. So in working on that, it's fine with me if people have other options that are better. If I can make Zcash better, that means it's sort of a lower bar to what options people have. So it's fine with me if there's something better. If we make Zcash better in certain aspects and then alternatives react to that or stimulated by that to outcompete, such as, for example, if we got pervasive privacy on layer 1 for other cryptocurrencies, I would consider that a complete success. So I'm just focusing on Zcash. So the mission statement was about empowering everyone. So then the question is who? Who are we empowering? I think it's kind of a deep question. There's issues of like access to technology and how it propagates through culture. But for this talk, this is sort of a like man on the moon kind of speech or talk. So I just found like this UN projection of population, could be wrong, who knows, but says by 2050 about 10 billion people. I think we should try to make Zcash usable by 10 billion people by 2050 if we can. We should try our best to do that. So here's a logistic curve, but it sort of shows a common pattern for the number of people adopting technology. So I'm saying, let's do the horizontal line. Let's say that's 10 billion. Let's say the timeline is 2050. Let's do our best to get there. How could we make Zcash a viable option for all people? So there's this breakdown. Maybe this doesn't cover everything. Maybe I'm missing things. So if so, let me know. But first of all, I think users would have to want to use Zcash. They would have to be able to use Zcash. And then the next three are Zcash are sort of about Zcash continuing to exist and improve. So somebody has to operate the infrastructure, and in particular, they have to make money doing that, I argue. There needs to be sustainable, coordinated governance. So Andrew was just talking about like this polling thing as like a tool. There's this bigger question of how the community makes decisions, and those questions are like fundamental and crucial for making Zcash a valid option for everyone. And then fifth, I believe that the people doing the development and coordinating governments need to make money to do so. So I keep saying make money. The reason I say that is I believe that is the way to make an effort sustainable. It's not the only way. There are other motivations for people to do things. But I think at a global scale, this is like a key motivation, because even if you are extremely devoted to a cause, but it costs you money to contribute to that cause, that really limits the amount of effort you and others can make towards that cause. So now I kind of want to dig into these and see how it actually touches on scalability. The first one, users need to want to use Zcash. I'm not going to talk about too much, even though it's extremely important. But I do want to clarify, when I say this, I'm always assuming users are making their own choices. Like they have the responsibility to do that. So I don't mean like, let's make advertisements that are like pharmaceutical advertisements where there's just pretty people smiling and music and then it says Zcash, right? I don't mean stimulating people's desire to make like a decision that isn't in their own interest. I mean people choosing out of their best interest to use Zcash. There is one thing I want to say about wanting to use it and being able to use it, and I think privacy ties in here. I think that privacy fits into number 2 here, being able to use it. I think it's required for censorship resistance and permissionlessness. If you don't have privacy, even if you can like issue transactions and submit them to a network and that can be recorded in a ledger, you're too vulnerable to being coerced by outside actors. Even if you have like an immutable append-only ledger in the sky, but you don't have privacy, I think the amount of options that gives you is limited by the fact that people can find you and coerce you. So I think it's necessary to be able to use cryptocurrency for it to have privacy in the long run. And I also think people want privacy. And I think there's sort of waves of discourse or like a pendulum swing I've noticed in my own experience where privacy has become more or less a topic in like the public consciousness. I think right now it seems, at least from my filter bubble, to be an issue that's coming into people's minds more frequently in more cases. I'm just thinking of Facebook right now, but there's many other cases. So I think those two are integrated and they're related to privacy. There's another aspect about being able to use. So the infrastructure has to be there and like operational, but usability is key, a key consideration in making something making technology that people can use. And so we want to focus when we are working on scalability at the Electric Coin Company, which is a growing focus of ours. We want to make sure whatever designs or ideas we have keep usability in mind, kind of as a fundamental constraint or requirement. So digging into usability a little bit, there are a few concepts that we've been discussing in our conversations and research about scalability. So one is we don't want to interfere with how people use the software or like the use cases they have or like their cognitive model of how Zcash works. We don't want to interfere with that as the network scales up, if at all possible. So there's a chart here on the left that I got from this, this great blog post about blockchain fees and different designs, which I recommend you read. It's somewhat relevant to what I'm talking about here. But on the left is median block sizes for Bitcoin. And you can kind of see it chugs along. It's sort of growing on something that looks like it could be the beginning of an S-curve. And then it just hits flat point for a little while. And then it starts growing a little bit again, but on a different sort of trajectory. That flat point is the Bitcoin block size. And I think the growth after that is after the introduction and adoption of SegWit. So this is like a particular data point that ties into how Bitcoin use cases and usability went through this qualitative shift because of hitting this scalability limit, this capacity limit. So I think it's funny when people say Bitcoin is not for buying coffee, because aside from like speculative investment, the only thing I've done with Bitcoin is buy coffee. Like in 2012, or 2011, whenever I first got excited about it, my coworkers and I, every day, we would go buy coffee and pay each other back in Bitcoin with full node wallets on our phones. That doesn't work anymore, and maybe we were naive, based on the design, but it's still important and interesting to me that we learned this usage. We got accustomed to it, we got excited about it, and that's no longer like the supported usage. So this use case shift has happened. So this feeds into like three concepts we're using when we're talking about scalability designs. So one is usability continuity. That's kind of about users' cognition and how they use the software. We want that to have continuity. So if the concept is you can send to, from shielded addresses to shielded addresses, and to send all you need is an address and an amount, and you post a transaction asynchronously, we don't want to disrupt that if at all possible. Use case continuity is closely related but distinct. If there are people using Zcash in particular ways, we want to be able to not interrupt those use cases as Zcash scales to a larger usage. And then the third one is something we call UX unobtrusive infrastructure. And this is that we don't want the user like cognitive model to need to know or care much about the scalability design. So a counter example of this would be if there's some sharding system and users learn that if the recipient is on the same shard as them, the fees or the time to finality is lower. That would be a counter example of this. We want to preserve sort of this uniform usage in our scalability design. And then, oh yes, this important thing, what I'm talking about with scalability is focused on kind of keeping the base layer, preserving these qualities in the base layer, but also making the base layer scale up to very large capacity. But it doesn't preclude doing other things which we should be doing, like interoperability with other blockchains, second layer that might have different usability but makes certain use cases much more convenient or enables new use cases. So those are also important. I think we should do them concurrently. The Electric Coin Company is focused on this sort of base layer scalability. And I just wanted to clarify, scalability means different things. It could be like social scalability, it could be technical, whatever. What we are focusing on is a technical design for horizontal scalability, and that specifically means the network capacity increases as new infrastructure is added. So currently Zcash or Bitcoin or others do not have that. If more full nodes arrive or more miner capacity shows up, the transaction throughput of the network does not increase. So we want to find an architecture or a design where as new infrastructure arrives, the total capacity of the network increases. So now I want to talk about sort of a connection between being able to use Zcash and making money from operating the infrastructure. So like the obvious thing here now is transaction fees. But if we have this horizontal scalability, we want to make sure that as transaction demand increases and starts to hit a capacity limit, it incentivizes infrastructure providers to show up and add more infrastructure. If we can find a design that does that well, then the system can scale up to a very large number of users kind of dynamically and naturally. So in our designs, we are thinking about mechanism design where we want to see, first of all, we want the technical architecture to be functional, operational, and then in addition, if possible, we want to ensure that the sort of built-in incentives support scaling up to a very high capacity. So like I just said, as long as if we can find some way, I'm not promising anything, by the way, but if we could find a way to properly incentivize new infrastructure coming to increase the capacity of the network in response to economic demand from users, that would be good. There's this extra credit thing on the bottom about a flywheel. A flywheel is a physical heavy wheel, and if you can get it spinning, it's like a top. If you can get it spinning, it maintains momentum for a long time and can continue. So in business strategy, if you can make a marketplace or a platform or a product where different users are sort of stimulating each other to use that technology or product more, that's called flywheel. So if we could close the loop, again, I'm not promising we can do this, but it's something we're thinking about and investigating. You can close the loop so that as more infrastructure operators show up, they tend to stimulate more demand for using Zcash capacity, then that would make the system, that would sort of nudge the system towards growth on that scale. Yeah, so a loop, a cycle. Oh boy, the time. So now we get to the fun, messy stuff. So there needs to be sustainable, coordinated governance. I don't have a solution or a specific answer yet to the kinds of things Andrew was bringing up, but we should all be talking about it and sussing that out. But I can say, just from sort of an engineering strategy or product strategy standpoint at Electric Coin Company, we have this concept of what I call the Zcash governance ratchet. So the idea is when Zcash launched, it was launched by our company, and we just sort of did whatever we thought would be good to do. And the same happened up through Sapling, and then starting with Blossom, we attempted to coordinate better with the foundation about how to select and find what upgrades should happen. Blossom didn't work so well, but we learned. And so for NU3, the next one, which doesn't have a name yet, by the way, so if anyone wants to pick a name, you should suggest it on our forum. NU3 is the first time we coordinated well with the foundation in having like an improvement process. And each release moving forward, we want to take whatever step we can to improve governance or openness in collaboration of defining Zcash. So here's like a little timeline. Let me skip this because there's this infographic that's kind of the same thing. All of the Zcash logos are the different upgrades. We're sort of at in the midst of defining NU3. NU2, we're in the midst of implementing, but it hasn't activated yet. So on the left, we have the early days where the company just kind of did what it thought was best. NU2 and NU3, we're trying to figure out how to collaborate with the foundation and also outside contributors who are proposing zips. We're working much more actively with them now, and that's a priority for us. Hopefully, starting with NU4, we want to begin something with the Zcash Foundation that we call 2 of 2 multi-sig governance, which basically means both organizations would need to agree on how to define the Zcash protocol. If they go off and do something that the other doesn't support, that's fine, but they just can't call it Zcash. So, oh, sorry, one last thing. So these are all things we can sort of do between the company and the foundation. And it's sort of relatively easy for us to do because we can have centralized decision-making between those two centralized organizations, like Andrew was discussing. It doesn't touch the difficult, complicated thing Andrew was bringing up about how the community itself can make decisions, or how we can make decisions as a whole for Zcash that are legitimate in everyone's eyes. So this is sort of like bringing up the rear, or doing the simple steps that we can do now, that we know we can do, that I think improve governance. Okay, the last thing, the people developing the tech and coordinating governance need to make money to do so. That, I think, might sound weird to some folks, but I'm gonna explain why I argue this is true. So some blockchains do this, some don't, where they have funding from the issuance of tokens that goes into development and decision-making. Some don't do this. So there's a common concern or criticism about blockchains that do this. There's this kind of obvious risk that the design and governance of the cryptocurrency affects how wealth can be redistributed in the system. So there's this dangerous feedback loop, and that's true, that's a risk. There's this other issue, DevFund can centralize development, meaning fewer organizations might contribute if some receive funding from the blockchain and others don't. That's also a risk. I think that one is potentially easier to manage than the first problem. However, I think there's this risk and danger on the other side that I don't hear people talking about very much. So you might say, like, Bitcoin does not have any issuance in the blockchain to fund development. So there are more people contributing to development, and it does seem that way right now to me. It seems like it has a large network effect and multiple contributors. But over the long run, I think there's an important risk. So there's kind of two parts to the risk. First, there's this free rider problem. If you hold Bitcoin like speculatively, like I do, but you do not spend your cost or effort to improve Bitcoin directly, you're benefiting and somebody else is doing that effort. So why are they doing that effort? They might have various motivations. Are those sustainable? One kind of motivation is that they might have a product or a service that makes money by using the blockchain. And I've heard a lot of people say that can be a good way to sustain development of the blockchain, but I disagree. I think that presents a substantial risk, because if you have a product or service that's generating revenue and you're operating in a for-profit fashion, you are incentivized to create a defensive moat around your product or service, and you're in competition with others. If there's also this free rider problem where people don't have an incentive to contribute to the development unless they're working for one of these products or services that are competing to create a moat. I think there's this potential problem where those developers are incentivized to sort of capture the network or alter its operation to support their moat, and that is not in the interest of all users. So I think we should do a moonshot. We should see if we can protect users' interests, and I think the way to do that is through funding coming from the blockchain. Don't worry about that. That's the end. Come see the conversations on the third day from Josh Cincinnati and Zuko, more about funding and governance. And if you want to talk about scalability, technical stuff, listen to Darius coming up. So thanks.